Aloha! This is Stan in Gainesville, Florida, and you are listening to Light Talk.
Hi, this is Steve in Dallas, Texas, and today we're going to talk about everything from gobos to high-end systems on Light Talk.
And this is David in the beautiful Belmont Shore neighborhood of Long Beach, California. And if you don't already know, you are listening to Light Talk, and we are the Lumen Brothers!
Indeed.
Well, guys, we are back. This is episode 70, the big 70, and we are approaching a milestone. Do you guys know what the milestone is?
A bunch of downloads.
A bunch of downloads. We are closing in on 50,000, which is pretty amazing.
No way! In a year.
Well, a year and a few months, yeah. That's pretty damn good, wow. 50,000. That's going to happen in a couple of weeks. We're going to have to come up.
We could fill a stadium with that.
We can fill a stadium. We could graduate everybody at the University of Florida with that.
Ouch.
But
ouch,
anyway.
Ouch.
Anyway, we last week, episode 69, we had our Paulie Constable interview, and we've been getting a lot of great feedback about that. It was truly inspiring. If you haven't heard it, go listen to it. It is fantastic. And today, we welcome back our brother, Stan K, to Light Talk. Hey, Stan, how was your second honeymoon in Maui?
Well, okay, first let me say, before I tell you about the second honeymoon, you guys put on some great shows without me. It's good to know I'm not indispensable.
You're not needed.
That's right. Sister Ann was wonderful. And I do want to say from my heart that you guys made me feel like I was still part of the show by, ribbing me and making some jokes and referencing me about this and that. So I really appreciate that. Listening to it when I was in the plane, I felt like I was still a part of the show. So I'm really happy for that. And in terms of a second honeymoon, I mean, what could go wrong? It's a second. It's
a lot
second
could go
honeymoon.
Wrong. Let me tell you that
in Maui, with a great woman. I mean, the things. How could it be? How could it be bad? I would just say I hadn't been to Maui. I've been to all the other islands except for the one that non-Hawaiians can't go to, and it was. It's a beautiful island. The Haleakala crater that's my cathedral, man. That's where God is. It's like you're watching nature create weather up there. It's the youngest land on Earth, those islands. I just feel like it's very spiritual. I love it a lot. I plan on spending even more time, and I think my wife was more convinced now that we need to spend more time. I think it's the best vibrations of any place I've ever been. It's the best vibes, and I really enjoyed that. And I think she was nervous because our kids are on the mainland, but I think moving forward, we'll probably spend more time there. It's very special. So thanks, guys, and it was a really good time.
Well, Stan, do you want to tell the listeners about our plans? Stan and I and Pam are going to open a bed and breakfast on Maui.
But we were talking about they have these timeshares. And I thought, why would you spend money with a company for a timeshare? You just get 3 or 4 friends. And you take a little bit of money each and you buy a condo and you just say, okay, you get it for 3 months, I get it for 3 months, you get it for 3 months. And then there's your own little timeshare business. And that would just make it more affordable. And sometimes you can go together, sometimes you can go on your own. And then in between when you're not there, you just sort of get somebody to manage it and rent it. I don't know. We would just kind of thinking out loud, how could we make it easier? And it's a great place to be. It's a good jumping off point to Asia, to South America, to Galapagos. I mean, it's a great place to have a base.
Well, I actually developed the idea a little more because I was inspired by Fawlty Towers. And I think that if we did like this little sort of bread and breakfast, we could do like a John Cleese thing where we can like invite all these foreigners in. It'd be fantastic. But, listen, we have to think about what we do after we retire. And I think that, we'll talk about it. So anyway, that's not for the show. Anyway,
not for the show.
Welcome back,
okay.
Stan. We missed you. Yes, and Steve and I and Stan would like to thank once again the fabulous Ann McMills for filling in. She was fantastic.
Yeah.
She will be back, I'm sure.
She will be back. So, she is on deck all the time.
On deck.
On deck all the time.
Anyway, so I have the first question of the day, and it comes from Tom. And Tom in Philly writes, I want to add some projections into my high school productions. Can you suggest a budget way to open that door? For me, budget means $300.
Ouch.
Okay. Fasten your seatbelt, Tom. $300, forget it. It ain't going to work. You can't do projections for $300.
Bumpkus.
Well, okay, well, you can answer this, Steve, when I finish tearing poor Tom's hopes to pieces, and you can give him a little bit of hope. First of all, a lot of people feel that, when technology reaches a point where you can get consumer grade equipment for like $200 or $100 or whatever, that it is suitable for professional or even educational work. It is not. Okay. I have an old saying. It's that if you can't do it right, you can't afford it, then don't do it at all. Because let me tell you something about projections. Usually the type of video that we see in shows is somewhat substantial to the overall look of the show. And that means that you're going to be depending on the projections, which means you're going to be depending on the technology. And the technology is not cheap. Now, what you're saying for $300, $400, those are usually low-end consumer-grade projectors that are not designed to withstand the challenges of the theater. I have a lot of experience in this. Actually, all three of us have. And I'll just tell you right now that the theater, first of all, there's dust, there's heat, there's vibration, there's movement, there are strange power fluctuations, there's data interruptions, and we're not even talking about the media server yet. We'll get to that in a second. But I have worked with systems where we spent $20,000, $30,000 on projectors, a few $1,000s on power conditioners. We've gotten the best data cable. We've spent, $5,000 on a decent media server, and there are still problems. And let me tell you something, when your projectors go out, because there's a data spike or a power spike somewhere, it is not a pretty sight. Usually what happens is that the projector, depending on what's going on, if it's a data issue, then everything goes blue and there's a Samsung logo on the front of your set, or they go out totally. There are a lot of challenges in the theater that you really can't go cheap on. And you have to have a backup plan. Now, we just did these two shows in Central City where we've spent about $40,000 on equipment. And there still were two instances where the projectors went out. And this is a professional company. So I say, I'm looking forward to what Steve has to say and how we're going to do it for $300 dependably. So go, Steve. Knock it all down.
Okay, Tom, I'm here for you. Picture, the year is 1973. It's New York. And Alvin Ailey, the great Alvin Ailey, comes on stage to perform, and he uses projectors. Mm-hmm. What does he use? He uses carousel projectors.
Yep.
3 projectors in every wing running in sync, projecting onto the people on stage. I've seen opaque projectors used quite effectively. But the thing about projections is they don't have to be video. They can be still projections. And if you look at something like that, then there's 2 things going for you. The best thing that Kodak ever made in the way of a projector is on sale on eBay for probably $20. Also, your high school might have a few in storage, so that's one thing. What David has to say about video is absolutely true. It's going to be hard to pull it off for $300. But again, it depends. If you're in a cafetorium somewhere in a small space, then you might be able to pull it off with something that the AV department has. But you've got to think, you're not going to get $40,000 worth of equipment for $300. So you've got to kind of think a different way to skin that cat. And I would go with carousel projectors.
Yeah, I guess I was assuming we're talking video. I guess, yes, you could go carousel. You go overhead projectors, for God's sake. You could do what Josh did, just get some overhead
I just found one for $13.
If you're really clever, Tom, you could have maybe a psych or a scrim on stage, and you could have a puppeteer upstage with an ostrich puppet and a floor light, a stinking $50.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. That's another type of projection. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. So I wanted to say something. I agree about the overheads, and the overheads can be dynamic. if you think back to Joshua White and liquid light shows, which are making a comeback. I have a student who's coming this fall, a new grad student who's done liquid light shows. He loves it. And so I see $300 Apollo Horizon 2 overhead projectors, and you just put plastic on there and colored goop and jello and whatever, and you can do all sorts of interesting psychedelics with that. You could do prints and stick them on there. You could. I was going to also point, Tom, to the Omaha Magic Theater. I don't know if they're still around, but you might go back and look at the history of Megan Terry. And a production that she's most famous for was called Viet Rock, which was sort of a protest thing against the Vietnam War. But those people do some of the most innovative things with junk, right, or stuff that they just acquire. And I think they had a lot of overhead projectors in their studio when I did work with them one time years ago. So I think with your $300 and a little bit of creativity and a little bit of resourcefulness, like Steve says, things can be done.
You could also look at, depending on your age, you can certainly go to the public library and find a book, but you could also look at a thing called a Lennebach projector.
And that ties into the inverse square law, which I'm going to touch on again later. William in Canada writes, what's the difference between an amateur and a professional? I like this question because I think I have a smart answer for it. And I think it's there's two ways to kind of cut this. First of all, certain words have certain connotations, and connotations are not necessarily what the word really means. So I was curious about this years ago, and so I did a little research. Amateur actually comes from the word amorous. So amateur really means lover of. So it doesn't have anything to do with the quality of your skills or this or that. It really just means, do you love what you're doing, or you do something out of love? And I would argue that there are plenty of professionals who, in their hearts, are amateurs because they love what they do. Now, another way to define these words might be that if the amateur does the work for love, they may or may not get paid. A professional may do the work for love, but they probably don't do it for free. So one way to sort of demark it might be a professional gets paid, an amateur may or may not get paid. It doesn't mean a professional doesn't love what they do, but amateur has this negative connotation of somebody who is not competent, and I don't think that's correct. That's a connotation, that's a perception of the word. The meaning of the word is not that. So that's how I think the difference is.
Well, can I ask a question, Stan? Does that mean that a professional does not have to love their work and still be called a professional?
I think there probably are people in all businesses who are extremely competent in their jobs and may not love it. They just do it because they're good at it, and it feeds the family. It's entirely possible.
But an amateur must love their job.
I think people who are amateurs do it because they love it. I mean, it could be a cameraman at CBS, okay, who sits behind the camera all day and is an excellent cameraman. But if you ask him, does he love his job, you might get pays the bills.
Okay, we have Philip in the UK, and he writes, Hey, Steve. Enjoyed your masterclass at ETC. I've been working my way through your episodes, and everyone knows you're a Verilight guy. Yet you were the first Lumen to invest in high-end solar line. Can you tell me why? Well, I had a need for a light, and high-end had a very good piece of equipment at the time that fulfilled that need. I have the Solar Frame Pro Spot and also the wash units. And I would say the main reason I bought them was that I work at a university. So my belief is a university should be a laboratory for experimentation and research and working with things that you may bump into along down the line. So yes, I am a Verilight guy, but high-end had a very good product, and I wanted that product to be part of my curriculum at SMU. Also, when I really looked at the solar line, and again, I bought the solar frames, high CRI, it was plus 90. It had a 20,000 lumen output, which made it one of the brightest lights out there. Super quiet operation. So I could put it, and I've pretty much dedicated that line into our black box space, which is roughly 60 by 60 by about an 18-foot high grid. So it's a very confined space, and those things are effectively dead silent. It's a Texas company with a long history of quality products. But I just like the light. I got them up here. My master electrician and I kept them for about a week and put them through their paces, did a shootout with some other stuff. And there was just, I didn't think at the time there was anything better on the market. And so I'm very happy with what I've bought. And what I would recommend to you, if you're thinking about buying a light, whether it's a Martin or a Roby or a Verilight or Elation or, I mean, you pick it. You should get that light into your facility and you should try it out and you should put it through its paces and see if it's going to work for you and not just take my word for it. You guys have some high-end equipment also.
Yeah, so I remember hearing about this, all this from David, who then told me that Steve had already bought some. And David, I think you were in the process, which got me all excited, which actually is the genesis of the beginning of Light Talk. We go back full circle here. And we had that conference call and I learned about the lights. And then I was looking for a completely silent moving light, which I didn't think existed because my director hated the sound of our old VL3000s, which are pretty old, and we then started to explore the solar line, and we've got nine of them in-house, 7 of the solar theaters, which are heavy but perfectly silent, and 2 of the 750s, I think, I forget which one. And we're really happy with them. We've had some bumps in the road, but they've been incredibly supportive. So we're really and I still love Verilight too. Don't get me wrong. I was dreamed about having Verilight, and we bought at UF the first non-rented, non-leased VLs I think in the country. One of them is like number 6 off the assembly line, the old VL 2201s, which don't run anymore, but we do have some 1000s. And so, solars are great. We love them.
Yeah. My only objection to this entire conversation is the whole idea of being a name your manufacturer guy. If you're a designer who's totally open to almost anything as far as accepting new ideas, then you need to accept new tools. Companies change. Sure. Verilight has changed dramatically since they first started because different companies have bought them. I mean, now they belong to Philips. It's a different type of company. Not saying it's a bad company or good company, but everybody evolves. Same thing happened to Martin. Hey, the same thing happened to High End, They're going to change now in a way. It's just part of life and a part of being a fanboy. I guess that's the term I want to use. Just things change and new tools come out. I started out with Verilight because I was at SMU at the time. They were right around the corner, but I wouldn't consider myself a Verilight guy or an ETC guy for that matter.
I'll wear either sweatshirt. If I look at my closet, I've got VLPS, I've got Verilight shirts, and I've got ETC shirts, and I've got Elation shirts. I agree with Dave. I don't think that's. I think that's pigeonholing people. We might have, again, like Steve said, I bought these because I had a need, and that light fit the need. As a designer and as a consultant too, we don't specify. We might use, for example, a particular manufacturer's spec to get the beginning of that specification written. We might go in there and edit it and say, as a basis for design, we're looking at this piece of equipment, but we will look at equals, and that happens all the time. So I think it's fair to be. I think it's fair to be open-minded. And I know Steve has a long relationship with VL. That's a beautiful thing. I have relationships with lots of companies. I mean, that's healthy. But I would do bristle a little bit about being pigeonholed. I can see what David's saying.
I'm fans of Roby, of Elation, of all that stuff.
We're fans of lights that work.
Yeah, exactly. when a light doesn't work, it's hard to be a fan. But I bet that Steve has at least 5 or 6 brands, manufacturers of lights in his inventory because we have to. I mean, that's just part of what we do.
Is that true, Steve? I bet it is.
Yes, they're all made in China.
That's right. And they're all made by Golden Seas.
Right. Which is where it's all going. Everything's getting consolidated.
My point is I want diversity at a university.
Right.
If I were at a regional theater somewhere, then I might have one manufacturer there because of parts inventory. But I don't really think about that. I think I'm training people to work with different types of equipment.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. And I think when we certainly think tomorrow. I have 2 meetings at the college here in town, not my college, where we're going to renovate this space. And I've got some ideas about what's going to go in there. We're going to hear from the provost, but we try to really, let's put the consultant hat on, like the designer. If you're the designer of the production, you want what's best for the production. And in this case, we want what's best for the client. And I will look at their budget and how much I think I can reasonably spend. And then I'm going to have to weigh manufacturers versus quality. Would I put in something that they're gonna have to fix in 5 years that I don't trust because that meets the budget so I can get them more? No, I mean it's a delicate dance, but we have to look at everything clear-eyed and objective, and I think that's just a good rule for life in general. To be as objective as you can.
And just to end this discussion and move on to our sponsor, and I'm going to talk about socialism for 1 second. We do not support one manufacturer over another. The only reason why we talk about the lighting equipment that we use is because we've had experience with that lighting equipment. So to sort of pigeonhole anyone to say, well, these guys like high end, or they like or they like ETC or Verilight, whatever. It's just because that's our experience. So, to all the manufacturers out there who wonder why we don't talk about your equipment, if you just send us really nice swag like jackets,
we'll talk all day long.
We'll talk all day long.
We can be bribed.
We can be bribed.
No, we can't. I mean, it's just part of our business to talk about the gear. And David's right. It's what we've been exposed to, but we have to really keep an open mind, and we should.
Right.
You are listening to Light Talk with the Lumen Brothers, and Light Talk is sponsored this week by...
We have another public service announcement from No More 10 out of 12s. And I have to say, this is kind of a personal testimony. As a boy, I was scrawny, I was weak, I was prone to illness. I thought I was destined to lead a life of a pathetic theater lighting designer. But after several seasons of summer stock, I learned that I could be tough, scrappy, even unstoppable. Then I discovered rock and roll. I'll always remember the day I started my career in the touring industry. I was looking forward to seeing the world, but I soon learned that all I would see is the inside of an arena. As the endless days turned into months of repetition, I asked myself a simple question. Are you tough enough to be a rock designer? Well, the answer lay in some serious self-evaluation and some inward-looking questions. So I've got 3 things for you guys out there who think you might want to be a rock and roll lighting designer. 3 things. Number 1, can you think positive at all times? For example, do you start to panic and lose control when the truck is late? Do you beat on the console when it crashes even though you know that might just lead to disaster? Do you have imaginary arguments with yourself and the lead singer over his marks on stage? I think we've all been there. Number 2, can you develop environmental toughness? For example, can you handle a state fair, a rodeo, or a festival gig? Are you fit enough to dodge falling shackles from the uprigger? Can you survive 121 dates of breathing nothing but fog and eating pizza? Number 3, can you handle small discomforts? For example, 10 guys on a bus that sleeps 9. A headset that feeds back and reshapes your ear. The constant chorus of, can I have a t-shirt, man? If you answered yes to all these questions, then congratulations. You are tough enough to be a rocker. This has been a public service announcement from No More 10 out of 12s.
That's great.
I've never been on tour in a technical capacity, but I have been on tour as an artist in rock and roll. And there are a lot of nice things about being on tour and some horrible things too, but it's an interesting lifestyle. Don't do it if you're over 30.
Now, back to Light Talk. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about light meters because you guys had a really good conversation. And Steve was right when he said I wasn't there to defend myself. But I think you guys covered it really nicely and some really good information there. But I did just want to chime in and add a little bit to it. And to honor the 3 things, let me just say this, that every lighting designer, regardless of the industry you work in, should understand these 3 concepts about lighting metrics. 1, there's a thing called illuminance. And illuminance is measured in foot candles or lux. 10 foot candles is 100 lux. And that's about incident light. That's light hitting a surface. And you're really looking for uniformity when you make that measurement. But that's not what we see. The second thing that we measure, and there are 3 types of meters. So an illuminance meter measures foot candles. Luminance is reflected light, which is the light that your eyes actually see. It's the incident light bouncing off the surface and coming back to your eye. And that's measured in candelas, sometimes in candelas per centimeter squared and sometimes in candelas per meter squared. That is what we see. So the foot candles are not what you see. That's illuminance. That's light hitting the surface. Luminance is what bounces back at you, and that's measured in candelas. And I can go into deep in the weeds about what candelas are and how they're determined and so on. And then the third thing that we measure is spectrum, which is the frequency content, right, of a light source, which is measured in nanometers and amplitude in terms of spectrum. And the thing to look at to understand spectrum now is to put CRI aside and to look at TM30. And what we get from that measurement is the quality of rendering. David mentioned the really important thing that I just want to amplify. He mentioned the contrast in a composition. And in other fields, that's called the contrast ratio. And contrast ratio can be measured, right? Usually 1:1 would be very, very ordinary and not dramatic at all. 5:1 would be extremely dramatic. In theater, like Ann said, we don't need a meter to do that or a measurement because we use our retinas to make that determination. But if you're designing lighting in a computer, in architecture, for example, you can get a measurement, an accurate one. Say, okay, the amount between the wall and the column is a 2:1 ratio. I want it to be more dramatic. I want it 4:1, so I'm going to have to make some changes. That's really important. And then Steve mentioned the inverse square law, which every lighting designer should have the basic concept, and he explained it very simply. What I'm going to do is I'm going to post an image and a formula that I did years ago for an IES document that really gives you a visual representation of inverse square law and the numbers and how to calculate it, even though you can simply just double the distance, 3/4, and you get a 75% reduction. So I just wanted to add those concepts, but just to review real quickly, illuminance, foot candles and lux, luminance, what you actually see, candelas, and then spectrum is the color content of the light. And there are meters for all three of those. And depending upon the job, you may or may not need them.
What meters do you own?
My illuminance meter is an Exactech. Okay. I know that people like the Minoltas a lot, and then Ann mentioned the other one. Those are all good meters. My Exactech is less expensive, but it gives me ranges, and it was small. I can put it into a showcase if we're looking at an object. So that's for illuminance. For luminance, I have a reflectance meter, and it's made by. I'll get a picture of it and post it on the Facebook page. I can't remember. It's what the people who set up movie screens use, so they can make sure that the light is even across the field of a screen, right? It's a reflectance meter. And that's actually measured in foot lamperts, which has to then be converted to candelas. And then my spectrometer, which is the one that David is referring to, is the passport. Lighting passport.
Yeah,
and what's cool about that meter, it will do illuminance, but not at low levels. Okay, that's why I have the Exactech because in the museums you need 50 lux or less, or 5-foot candles or less on most sensitive objects. And conservation is a whole other aspect of lighting. But on the spectrometer, what I liked about that one is we discovered it is as accurate as the Minolta spectrometers, but the sensor is all you're paying for and all you have to carry. The app basically is all the software, which they can update more easily from downloading. So rather than having to build a body for all the electronics, it's advantaging the electronics of your phone or your iPad for the software, and you're just really buying the sensor, so it becomes a little bit less expensive. But the sensor, it's not using your phone's camera as the sensor. It's a real sensor.
It's using it as a computer, basically.
Correct. It's just using your phone as the computer, right? So that's so. And ocean optics. If you're really into spectroscopy, I don't own an ocean optics spectrometer, but if you're doing really sensitive work like we did in the museums, then ocean optics is probably the best one if you're working in the science realm. But I just wanted to make those points that students and practitioners should understand those three concepts. We don't see foot candles. We see candelas. We see what's reflected. And those two words are easy to interchange: illuminance versus luminance, and then spectrum. There are other types of meters, but I think those three broad categories and also conceptually how you think about light. You're talking about spectrum, you're talking about rendering, you're talking about brightness, you're really talking about candela, right? And if you're talking about incident light on a surface, then you're measuring in foot candles. It's unfortunate in a way that I've had architectural lighting designers who said they design projects based on luminance rather than illuminance. And actually, to get to David's point about contrast ratio, you really need to look at luminance, because foot candles won't tell you the contrast ratio because the luminance is a result of the materials. So black versus yellow, for example. What's the contrast ratio, right? You have to look at the luminance, what the light coming back off the surface, not the light that's incident on the surface. Don't get me going on this. I spent way too much time thinking about it. But I just wanted to put those concepts out there for folks to sort of think about, and they should know, and people should know those terms. So we use the right terms.
Thanks, Stan. We appreciate that.
Let me ask you a question, Stan.
Okay.
Have you metered the sun?
You can meter the sun. Not to, when you go outside with your illuminance meter, there's a 10 times multiplier that most meters will let you do. And so what is the foot candle level of sun at high noon on a clear day?
More than 5.
Yeah, it's more than 5. But I did want to say, let me just tell you one where I agreed with Ann that usually we don't use the meter in the theater, but let me give an example. We were doing a show at the university, and the floor was light colored, and the cast was dark complexion. And the director was complaining that we couldn't see the actors very well. And so the designer kept, of course, bringing up the front light, right, to get more light on the faces. And what would happen is that the floor would get brighter. So I couldn't convince, it was difficult to convince the scenic designer that we couldn't fix that with light, that the floor needed to be knocked down so it wasn't as reflective. And that became a bit of a tension there. So I took out the reflectance meter, which has a 10-degree spot in it. You look through the viewfinder, and it's reading a little circle, and you watch the needle move up and down as you put it on those surfaces. And say, okay, please put the meter on the face. See what the level is? Yeah. Now put the meter on the floor. See what the level is? Oh yeah, I see. We can't fix that. If I take the light down, then the face gets darker, and so does the floor. We can't impact them separately. David's point about a shin buster is great, but this was not going to work in this production, right? It needed to be face light.
Your head highs from the front. You just have shadows. It's or footlights.
Yeah.
I mean, there are tons of ways of doing it without arguing about the floor, because they're either going to take the floor down or they're not. Or we have Lumensuck, and we just spray the whole damn thing with Lumensuck.
Correct. Well, the point of this story is that when I was able to demonstrate that through the use of the meter, the designer said, "Oh, I see your point. We'll knock the floor down for you."
He saw it in a meter, but he couldn't use common sense, because that's all it is, really.
No comment.
Okay, got it.
Now back to light talk. Lizzie in Oregon asks, I'm about to travel with a dance company this fall as the lighting supervisor. Have you had any trouble with TSA and Gobos? I don't want to take any risk losing them, and I'm not checking a bag if I don't have to. All I can say is I have not had that experience, to be honest. When I was traveling with Gobos, I wasn't on a plane, and there was no TSA. It was pre-9/11, so I'm showing my age. I would guess because it's sharp, it could be a problem. So I think you're probably going to have to send it ahead. Use the old U.S. mail or FedEx. Don't take that risk, because if they're that important to you, or I would maybe contact TSA. You can send them an email, but I wouldn't take the risk.
I'm going to do a stand right now. I'm telling you a little story. I was doing a show in Napoli in the beginning of the year, and I have this wonderful, wonderful department coordinator at school, and she has done so much wonderful things for me, helped me out, written things from. I mean, she's fantastic. And she came up to me before I left for Italy, and she asked me, "David, could you please bring me back something from Italy?" And I said, "Oh, really? What would you like?" And she goes, "I love limoncello." And I said, "Well, you came to the right guy." So I knew that she wanted a bottle of limoncello. So on my way out of the airport, coming back to the United States, I went to the duty-free shop, and they had all these different bottles of limoncello, different brands, and I found one. It was lovely. It was just this beautiful, and I knew it was a good brand of limoncello, so I bought it, right? I carried it with me. We went from Napoli to, I believe it was Frankfurt, had no problems going through the airport, because, they basically put it into the sealable clear bag. right? So, and you're holding it as carry-on luggage. So, everyone knows what it is, right? So I'm carrying it with me, no problem. Got on the plane from Frankfurt to San Francisco, and the people were saying, hey, let's open it up, let's drink it. I said, I can't. This is for my wonderful colleague back in the department. She's waiting for this. I should have bought two. So anyway, we arrive in San Francisco, middle of the night, and I go through TSA. And this lovely woman at TSA basically said, we're going to have a problem with this. And I said, well, why? I mean, look, it's limoncello, it's in this clear bag. And she goes, I'm going to have to open up the bag and test it. But we're going to have a problem. And I asked why. People bring back limoncello every day. She said, because the shape at the bottom of the bottle is indented, and our machines may reject this.
Interesting.
So sure enough, she took it out and she put it in a machine, and she said, I can't let you go on with this bottle because our machine cannot test this. Huh. And I explained the situation, that this is for one of my colleagues who, that's the only thing she asked of me. I owe her so much more, and I'm doing this as a favor. And she goes, I know, but we have laws, we have all this stuff. And I said, I'll tell you what. I said, how about you and I open this bottle right now and we both taste it? And so that
Really?
will prove that. And she laughed and she gave me the bottle. She goes, no problem. Just take this with you. So,
so she let it
go through. Now, the point being, the reason why I told that story is because you have to check with TSA first. I could have easily checked on TSA regulations on the internet to see what the bottle regulations were. And had I known that you can't bring across indented bottles, I would never have chose that brand of limoncello.
Interesting.
So do your research. I would guess, like Stan said, that they're not going to allow you because it's sharp and it's metal, but you never know. So do your research. Cool. Yeah. So Steve, have you ever tried to smuggle anything past TSA?
Yes, and let me just go into this. I
can't wait.
I have pre-check status.
TSA pre-check?
I have never had a problem with TSA except in Dallas, Texas. And,
where you live.
And I have to tell you, I've traveled all over the world. And what it comes down to, in my opinion, which is not reflected by Light Talk, my opinion is it's the person who's doing the check-in, and they have the power over you, and they do any damn thing they want to do. I two examples. I had, and if you followed Roscoe's story of my travels in Europe, I had a roll of gel, and that roll of gel was put inside a cardboard tube that was open at both ends. TSA confiscated my cardboard tube. The gel could go, but the tube couldn't go. In Dallas, Texas, they confiscated my 3-ounce bottle of aftershave. I go through, sorry TSA, I go through Dallas, Texas, and I'm in the pre-check line, and I go up there, and the guy says, empty all of your pockets, take off your belt. And I said, but I'm pre-checked. And he says, that doesn't mean anything. That means nothing. Take your shoes off while you're at it. And I was nice to him. I wasn't mean or rude, because that doesn't get you anything.
Right.
But then, he decides he's going to do a full luggage check. This was nothing but a guy who had a bad day, and I happened to be the schmuck standing in line. So I think you can call TSA all you want to about your gobos, and there's going to be that one person who's going to pull them because they don't know what they are and they don't care what they are. They just see it as a piece of metal. So I think you're going to have to either FedEx or you're going to have to suck it up and check a bag. Because, as you say, it's too important. I traveled with the Limon Dance Company for 25 years, and we hand-carried gobos on the plane. We never had a problem. But that doesn't mean it won't happen tomorrow, and all of a sudden they pull $1,000 worth of gobos out of your luggage.
Yeah, don't screw with the TSA. In their defense, sometimes, because I got global entry, which I think I've given up all of my constitutional rights to get, but it does make things easier and faster.
That's what I have. I have global entry also.
But sometimes, you have that. Sometimes you will be flagged just as a random search. But, it's worth getting global. I'm telling that now this is something for anyone who's ever going to do any international work. get the global entry. You'll be happy
you pay every year for that,
no,
right?
No, I paid once. It was like $50. But you have to give up. You have to basically sign off all your rights. They scan your retinas. But you basically give them permission to do as many background checks as they want. So that's just part of the deal. But boy, does it make life easy going in and out of countries.
I think if I were traveling with Gobos, I would pull them out of my luggage and have them right there in the open so they don't discover them. You're demonstrating them. And I would probably keep them in Roscoe plastic little baggies that Roscoe gives you. I would have it as obvious as what they are as possible. And I would probably even throw a Gobo holder into my luggage too to show them how they work.
That's interesting. I would actually make them into a necklace. I mean, you could actually wear them, just put a chain through the holes of the Gobo, and you could have like 40 Gobos around your neck. That would probably work too. Hey guys, that Hammond organ solo tells us that once again you've spent another morning listening to Light Talk. Be sure to check out our Light Talk website at lighttalk.org. And be sure to follow us on our Light Talk Facebook group page and subscribe to our podcast. That way you will not miss a second of Lumen Brother insanity.
No guarantee is offered regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions on this podcast.
In other words, take what we say with just 1 grain of salt from a saltwater dimmer.
Light Talk is written and produced by the Lumen Brothers, coming to you from Long Beach, Gainesville, and the Lone Star State.
And be sure to tune in next week when we discuss strobe lights and our responsibility to the audience. Any recommendations for road cases? How do you pick a master electrician? And could you discuss creating an RFP through a descriptive process?
All that and the new sponsor, Light Talk, broadcasting questionable Lumen knowledge and humor around the world.
So we'll see you all next Saturday morning. Bye-bye from Light Talk.
Bye-bye, everyone.